You are not free. And this reality has far more to it than you have been allowed to believe. And God is real.
I've had encounters with demonic spirits, and it's not very pleasant. They used a method called scrying, using a crystal ball to connect with the angelic realm. The scrying stone or crystal ball mounted on top of that becomes the focus of your intent for getting into an altered state of consciousness so that you can receive messages from these angels. The physical world that we inhabit, that there's levels of our being that can see and feel through space and time and touch other dimensions.
Have you reached out to Matthew Brown, or has he reached out to you? Have you ever spoken to him?
I can't really say too much about that.
What the hell is going on, everybody? Welcome to Polarity. My name is Josh, and I'm very excited to bring you a special guest today. My time researching the UFO phenomenon has really led me to seeing that all roads seem to lean back to the occult. And today's guest is somewhat of a specialist in that. We're going to be speaking to the owner of the YouTube channel, Lifting the Lamp.
Welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria.
Specializes in Enochian magic, spiritualism, occult practices, and he was also the creator of the Sigillum Dei Meth, which was the graphic that was referenced by Matthew Brown in his tweet to Elon Musk. And that's how we got connected. And I'm really excited to speak to him today and kind of pick his brain on where he comes from and how he got involved in these topics and how he's now looking at the UFO phenomenon. So, Mr. Lifting the Lamp, Eleftheria, how are you? Thank you for being here.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Josh. And thanks for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure, mate. Like I said, I'm really excited to speak to you. I've been having a little browse through your channel, and the stuff on there is super interesting. That sort of world was never really on my radar personally until I started looking into the UFO phenomenon and non-human intelligence, and kind of over time have begun to realize that the occult and that sort of world is far closer or far more intertwined with the UFO phenomenon than I ever realized. And I watched your interview with Pavel as well with Psychoactivo, and kind of seems like you're also sort of realizing that, but coming from the other side now as well.
Yeah, that's right. Before Matthew Brown made his X post, I mean, I had a little bit of an interest in the UAP phenomenon, mainly through the works of Dr. Stephen Greer, but it wasn't a big feature of my belief system or what I was interested in exploring at all. And the last few weeks have been a pretty deep rabbit hole, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let's start with, I guess, where it started for you. Like, how did you get interested in occult practices and spiritualism? And like, was there a specific moment that kind of brought you into that world?
Yeah, well, it's one thing that I tell people when I'm talking about how I got involved in the occult is that I didn't look for magic. Magic kind of found me. It was something that I was always meant to do. So it sort of began for me when I was 13. I had past life memory of being in pre-dynastic Egypt and following a individual known as Thoth, who I later learnt by doing some research was considered, an important person in Hermeticism and Western esoteric sort of beliefs. And then when I was 16 or 17, I came across my first occult books referencing this figure Thoth, and that's kind of what piqued my interest and sent me down that avenue of exploration. And I started practicing magic and got really into it, and then ended up joining an order to try and learn more and find out more. So I joined the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, when I was 18, and spent several years there. I've also been initiated into the AA, not Alcoholics Anonymous, the Order Argentium Astrum, or Silver Star, which is all about self-development and going through the tasks to sort of get to a higher spiritual level and that sort of thing. And I've explored some other things in there as well, but those are the two main things from my past that have given me a lot of this knowledge. And that was my introduction to Enochian magic as well, because Enochian magic is one of the things that's practiced in those two orders. So
Wow, okay. Yeah, there's a lot already in that I want to unpack. First of all, when you said you had this past life memory of Thoth, did you realize who that was or who he was at the time when you had the memory? Like, did you realize that this is the I believe he's like the god of wisdom in ancient Egypt? Is that correct?
Yeah. So the kind of intuition that I had, so the memory itself was like just kind of me in the desert as the sun was coming up, doing some kind of meditation. But there were some intuitions that went along with that as well, like that I followed this individual Thoth, who was a human being, who later became revered as a god because of his knowledge and because he brought magic to Egypt and all of that. And I didn't know that there was this whole kind of mythology around Hermes within Western esotericism already, and the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and all of that. This is just stuff that I thought was original information. So then when I looked into it more, I was pretty blown away to find that this is something others have said.
How did you draw that connection? Like, how did you realize this figure who was a human in your dream was actually who is known as Thoth, which is usually depicted as having like an ibis head, right?
Yeah. Well, I just had an intuition, I suppose, that there was this man, and that's what he was, and that was what the god Thoth was based off of.
Interesting. So, for those who are like unfamiliar, can you describe the Enochian magic system? Like, what is it, and sort of how is it relevant in modern occult practices?
Yeah, sure. So in the Western esoteric tradition, the kind of esoteric forms of spirituality that have been practiced in secret for the last several hundred years in Europe mainly, there's Western ceremonial magic that figures quite strongly in that, drawing magic circles and having different magical tools and summoning different kinds of entities. And so within that, there's also Enochian magic, which is a specific form of ceremonial magic, which was developed by a man called John Dee, with some help by another individual called Edward Kelly. And they attempted to contact angels. And they used a method called scrying, using a crystal ball to connect with the angelic realm and receive messages. And the angels then gave them messages that they have to create this system of magic with all these kind of tables and this new language, which we know today as the Enochian language. And so they built this system of magic around what the angels told them, and that became known as Enochian magic.
The word occult is super broad, right? I guess it just means hidden. So when we're talking about the occult, we're kind of talking about hidden sets of knowledge. And I guess some of the big names that you hear associated when people say the occult, you hear of like Rosicrucians, Freemasonry, things like that. The orders that you mentioned, I've never heard of before. I'm assuming are they kind of like is it just sort of like a local school, or are they something that have branches all over the world and they're just not as well known as something like Rosicrucianism?
Yeah, well, these orders do have branches all over the world, and they're not as well known as the big ones like Freemasonry, but they go back at least in the case of the AA, it goes back to the 20th century, early 20th century, and the OTO was founded in the 19th century. And the OTO, what can happen sometimes is you can have new orders that form that use some of the initiations of previous orders or some of the information from previous orders and sort of create something new. So the Ordo Templi Orientis incorporated a lot of Freemasonry, some Rosicrucianism as well in there. And that became a thing. And the AA kind of developed out of a previous order called the Golden Dawn, which explored, again, a lot of Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, and yeah, it was much more focused on, I guess, teaching people magic. The OTO is more of a Masonic type fraternity that people can join for common interests. But I guess the thing that connects them is an individual called Aleister Crowley.
I want to get into him later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was through him and one of his books, the Book of Thoth, that I got interested in these other orders and the kind of things that they were teaching.
Yeah, because it's interesting, right? Because this seems to be a bit of a theme in these occult groups, that they do seem to kind of evolve and new ones spawn that are just kind of like conglomerations of previous ones. Like this, that's what Crowley did, right? His was kind of a bit of this and a bit of that, and it kind of sounds like the things that you're involved with are that as well. And I wanted to get your opinion on this a bit later as well, but I feel like even maybe Scientology is almost that, but with a bit of a different like angle, more of it's a religion, I guess. But I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was involved with those guys, and it kind of seems like they might be doing the same thing. We'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to get too off track, but we definitely will. You mentioned before about yourself and even like John D as well, communicating with angels. And I know, because I've watched your channel, and I know this is something that you've done yourself as well. So can you walk us through that? Like, what is that experience like? How do you prepare for that type of communication, and what does it take?
Yeah. So in order to use Enochian magic to communicate with angels, you need to have a ritual set up first. So there's a holy table that you need to have, which sits on top of the Sigillum Dei Emeth that I mentioned in that video that Matthew Brown's viral ex-post referenced. It's this kind of wax seal with a 7-pointed star on it. And you've got 5 of those. 4 go under the table legs, and then 1 goes on top. And there's some other stuff that goes into that as well. But then you have the scrying stone or crystal ball mounted on top of that. And that becomes the focus of your intent for getting into an altered state of consciousness so that you can receive messages from these angels. And in order to bring the angels into the kind of ritual setting with you, there's invocations that you can read. For example, the Enochian calls. And then that gets you into this trance state. And you're reading a language. When you're reading the Enochian calls, you're reading a language which is, like it's not English or any other human language. It's a completely different form of speech, and that in itself can get you into an altered state. And then when you engage in the scrying session, you can sort of start to see things in your mind's eye, like visuals will come up, or you might have a thought in your head that comes from somewhere else, and it's giving you information about something. What people in the UAP community would probably call a download.
Yeah.
And it can be similar to remote viewing as well, the way that you sort of get into that altered state and get visuals and things like that. But quite often, it depends on the kind of Enochian magic that you get, but quite often it's to do with spiritual themes, the kind of messages that you get from these angels.
These are things that are spoken about in the UAP community, but not even just that. Like, I feel like people have these experiences, but it's relayed under whatever cultural framework or belief system they have, right? This seems to be a thing that's more common than people would realize. So what do you think that is? Like, for example, if you're chanting this Enochian language, right? Whereas someone else may have these similar downloads and similar messages, but it's just through meditation. So do you think, like, is there a significance in the chanting? Like, is the chanting to invoke a specific intention with the communication?
Yes. So depending on what kinds of calls you're doing, or what kind of angels you're invoking, there's a different intention behind it, and you're going to get specific kinds of information. But there's all kinds of ways that we can get into that altered state and open our consciousness up enough to receive something from something higher. So that's what I would say to that. And it can differ from cultures, and a lot of the way that different rituals are structured, it's as much about psyching ourselves up to get a particular result and have enough belief invested in that to get the result that we want, as it is with, connecting to the right kind of entity, I suppose.
Yeah, I actually spoke about this on my channel yesterday about belief. What do you think about the power of belief? Do you think, like, for someone who was uninitiated and perhaps interested in this stuff but not quite fully sold on it, do you think it would work? Like, do you think having that all-out belief, almost like a knowing, is essential to actually establishing a communication?
I think that, yeah, unless you got something really dramatic happening to you, like something appears in front of you and you've never believed in that before, I think in most situations, yeah, the belief is pretty essential. Because if you don't, well, the whole thing is that you're using the power of will or intention to get a result. So if you don't have that, if you haven't formulated that will or intent, then you're not going to get the result. And if you don't really believe in what you're doing, then that causes a blockage. You're going to not expect to see anything, and you're not going to be open enough to seeing something, so you won't. Or you might see something and dismiss it as it's just coincidence, or it's just my imagination. And this is something even I've been guilty of in the past. There's been experiences that I had which weren't necessarily brought on by a ritual, that might be a dream or a sudden insight that I have, and I've just thought, oh, that's just my imagination. And thinking back, I've thought that it's actually something else.
Yeah, well, I think that's like society kind of puts that pressure on us, right, to just dismiss these things, and that the world is not an interesting place, when I think actually it's far more interesting than we're told about. What have you learned from the times that you have interacted with angels? Like, anything that these communications have, like, maybe altered or shaped your worldview or your opinions on occult practices or the world?
Yeah. I think that it's made me a more moral person, like in the traditional sense of the word, like more caring about people and thinking about the consequences that my actions have on other people, and thinking about what's best for humanity as a whole rather than just myself, and just coming to realize that there are things greater than us in this universe, and we have to pay attention to that. And we're being watched closely, so we need not that that's the only reason why you should do good things, but it's something we need to be aware of. And I guess the responsibility that we all have to try and evolve towards that, and maybe recognize the opportunity that we've been given to do that by these beings, by kind of looking after us and sort of steering history in a certain direction.
Yeah,
It's
I think that's
something I'm beginning to learn as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great message as well, and it's comforting as well, right? Because I feel like often the the occult is like automatically a negative connotation that comes with it. People think it's like these scary people that are, you know, doing these weird rituals and perhaps manipulating society from the shadows and things like that. Let's go there now. Do you think, because from what you've just said, it actually sounds like an extremely positive experience and something that we could all benefit from. Do you think there are groups who are using this magic and these techniques for more of a self-serving purpose, for a power and, you know, control structure?
Yeah, I absolutely do think that. And I mentioned Aleister Crowley before. I've since distanced myself from the OTO and the AA because they prescribe to Crowley's kind of philosophy, and that's something that I really disagree with now as a result of these communications with angels and the like, and my own worldview shifting. But yeah, there are people that use it in a more selfish way. There are people who are Satanists as well, for example.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Are you familiar with Michael Aquino? Do you know who Michael Aquino is?
Yes, I do know who Michael Aquino is, and
what do you think about that
guy? I think that he's a creep.
Yeah, me too, dude.
On this altar is one of a number of daggers which we may use in our rituals. This one happened to belong to the commanding general of the most elite unit of Germany's infamous SS, which was concerned with black magic and occultism research in general. Anything that it could find that had to do with the origins of the human race, destiny of humanity. I have been to the Wewelsburg, which still preserves Heinrich Himmler's ritual chambers to this day, and have conducted a black magical ritual in the so-called Hall of the Dead beneath the Wewelsburg. This particular dagger is inscribed to our comrade in the Leibstandarte Theodor Wisch, Brigadeführer, a major general in the Waffen-SS. And on its blade, it bears the inscription, Mein Ehre heißt Treu, or my honor shall be known by my faithfulness.
When you realize that that guy was the head of psychological operations for the United States military, that's a damning fact, and it makes you really ponder over like the way things are in this world.
Yeah. Well, he was the guy that came up with, you know, the psyop. We all talk about this is a psyop. He's the guy that came up with psychological warfare. And he's got an interesting history as well, because he was in the Church of Satan originally.
Anton LaVey.
That's right. And he was almost like Anton LaVey's right-hand man. And he split from Anton LaVey because Anton LaVey saw Satanism as like a performative thing, whereas Michael Aquino saw it as like something which was actually trying to contact real demonic entities and had something really supernatural behind it. So then he founded his own group called the Temple of Set, which was trying to do that, which was influenced by LaVey as well as Aleister Crowley. So yeah, some of the darker stuff can come from Crowley as well. But yeah, he was a full-on Satanist. Yeah.
Yeah. And that Temple of Set was kind of like a New Age Satanism, like you said, like a spiritualism mixed in with, I guess, the Church of Satan, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it was pretty closely, well, slightly modeled off some of the orders that I described before. There's different levels of initiation, different grades, but it's all about following the god Set in ancient Egypt, who was seen as kind of like a pre-biblical form of the devil, because this was the god that was associated with everything that was other, everything that was dark. And so they sort of latched onto that as a more ancient and powerful form of devil worship.
Yeah, maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was Set not like the god of like chaos and order or something like that?
Yeah, the god of chaos, the god of deserts and foreign armies and darkness were sort of his main attributes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird because I'm pretty sure, is it like the Freemasons or something like that, where their slogan or whatever is like order out of chaos? I was watching something recently where that was, somewhere in these deep control structures, that was their thing, order out of chaos. And I feel like it ties into that. But that Michael Aquino guy, creepy, very creepy. Let's go back to something a little bit more positive for a moment. I wanted to ask you about angels and archangels. What distinguishes an angel from an archangel, and how do you think their roles sort of differ in spiritual or occult frameworks?
Yeah. It depends on what kind of system you use for describing the hierarchy of the angels. Generally speaking, archangels are seen as higher than normal angels. There's, according to some people, there's 9 orders of angels, and the very highest are like the seraphim, the flaming ones, and then the cherubim with the 4 faces underneath that, and then the ophanim, the wheels with the eyes, and that was Ezekiel's vision of the chariot of God. And then under that, you've got other ones with names like virtues and dominions and thrones. And angels and archangels are like 8 and 9 in that hierarchy. But other people just talk about angels and archangels. So I guess the main thing is the archangels are like the big guns, I suppose. And, Michael is seen as an archangel who's like one of the most powerful angels. Gabriel, the classic 4 archangels, would probably be the most important ones. Yeah.
Do you have, maybe perhaps based on your experience in communications, do you believe that archangels or even angels are actually playing any kind of role in what's kind of going on in society at the moment, or do you think they're guiding humanity?
I'm starting to think that maybe they are. I didn't think that before. I thought that the phenomenon of angelic communication through history was something that had a psychological explanation. Like we've just got this different part of our mind that we can't usually access, which people have described as the superconscious. And then when you get into these altered states, you sort of connect the 2 parts of your mind, and it's just us talking to ourselves. But just things have happened recently which have led me to believe that there's something outside of us that has its own intelligence that is behind the phenomenon of angels. And I think, if you look at how they're spoken about in scripture and elsewhere, they do seem to be, if not guiding us directly, then at least delivering a message to us in terms of, if you use your free will in this way, it might not end up well for everybody else. So in that sense, yeah, I think they are. I do think that a subset of the UAP entities, the light beings, as I call them, orbs, as other people call them, definitely have been influencing our history. And I don't know if that's the same as angels. I still haven't decided if I think that they're the same. But if they are, then yeah, then angels would have a much more direct influence in our history.
Those light beings, as you called them, or orbs, as they're kind of called in the UAP community more often, they seem to have a track record of like showing up in really sort of critical times, usually times that seem to revolve around like conflict and chaos. Their appearance seems to have a giant uptick, which is interesting. I mean, I don't know what that means. Are they there to stop us from destroying ourselves? Are they there to intervene, to guide us? or even is their presence, does their presence have some kind of like effect on our subconscious effect on our consciousness that, you know, calms us or guides us? Do you think angels, light beings, or, you know, whether they're the same thing or different, archangels as well, do you think they influence society on some kind of broader consciousness level, or do you think like they perhaps act through in some individuals, or both?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the more that I look into this topic, I think there's multiple ways that they can influence us. I think one way is they can just appear at certain times and just kind of give us a vibe that maybe encourages us through a particularly difficult time in our lives, which might have an influence on other people later down the track. Sometimes they can be more direct and give us messages or downloads to pass on to humanity. You know, I talk about how the angels have done that with me, but I'm not the only one. Lots of people have had the same experience where they have a communication with some kind of entity and it wants them to pass that message on. And that's another way that they can influence us. They can present a show of force as well, such as when they appear over nuclear weapons bases and shut them down, and other kind of more ancient appearances, like what Jacques Vallée describes in Wonders in the Skies. It's full of historic examples of similar things happening. You know, these things showing up during key wars and things like that. And I think there might even be a level to this, which goes even deeper, has a deeper level of influence on us, where it's actually changing the fabric of our species. The reason I say that is because in my own research on this topic, I initially looked into Dr. Stephen Greer, where I learned the C5 meditation from. And I also came across another bit of information, which was this lady, Mary Rodwell, who's a fellow Australian actually. And she started an organization called ACERN, and she studies the contact phenomenon and the way that there are new children being born, including to parents who are contactees themselves, who seem to have been altered in some way by some of these UAP entities. So they're actually potentially changing genetics or unlocking spiritual genes that we have. There's also potentially like a starseed phenomenon going on here as well, where these beings are being incarnated into human form, all in an effort to kind of elevate us.
Do you think there could be a connection to that and the sudden surge in ADHD or autism? Do you think I mean, it's total speculation, but I find these, like, a lot of the time people who are autistic or have ADHD are quite often like highly intelligent, like almost so intelligent that they don't really fit into normal society that well. And we're told it's a disorder or a disability, when in fact
that's my situation.
It's my situation too, brother. It's my situation too. And because on a personal level, it was quite clear to me growing up that, like, you know, I often had a lot of people around me, like I had lots of friends and stuff like that, but it was always clear that like my brain operated like very differently. Like I understood things a lot quicker. It was just clear to me that like the way when people would explain things, the way they would explain it, I was like, your brain just doesn't work the same as mine. I don't really know how to explain it better than that. And I'm not trying to say I'm like a starseed or anything like that either. But I would agree that given like that there seems to be some kind of shift in global consciousness, like an awakening, like I think awakening is the best way to say it. People are beginning to see things for what they really are, and that, you know, some of the things in the world that aren't necessarily very nice. But I think that's kind of the first step in things changing, right? You can't change something if you don't recognize it. And it does kind of feel like whether, there are star seeds and there are people put here on a spiritual level to help us through that shift. I don't know, but it certainly seems like something has happened in like the last 20 years where there is this recognition and push for a shift that's like desperately needed, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Yeah, in terms of the awakening that you described, yeah, I feel it too. Like, I remember like when our generation were younger, it was still kind of fringe to have all these alternative spiritual beliefs, I feel. But now, like, there's over 1 million people who describe themselves as witches in America, for example. Like, there's more witches in America now than one of the Christian denominations. It could have been like Presbyterian or Episcopalian or something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's been a huge growth in alternative forms of spirituality more broadly, and people becoming aware of another side to reality, which is really surprising as well, because we're supposed to be in this materialistic age where you can get anything by using science, and but people seem to be finding their way back to something higher.
So let's go back to, you mentioned before about people getting downloads and stuff like that. And I think I maybe have sort of over the last couple of weeks nudged you a little bit to looking into Tim Taylor. What do you think of that guy? Because he is super elusive in the UFO space. No one's ever had like a public interview with him. There's only like, 6 photos of him that seem to exist that people have seen. And we largely know about him through people like Gary Nolan, Dana Pasolka. And he's this like super high level guy at NASA. They call him the Dragon launch operator. Apparently he has dog tags for, Area 51, CIA, NRO, all the places. He was, he got very involved with Chris Bledsoe. You've read UFO of God, haven't you?
Oh, I'm working my way through it very slowly. I don't get much chance to pick it up, but I'm up to about chapter 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's all good. I was just wanted to make sure you knew who Chris Bledsoe was. But so this guy has, his own experiences, stimulated through trauma, which a lot of the time they seem to be. And then this Tim Taylor figure kind of appears in his life and becomes super involved with his family. So it's really, and this is a murky space. When people suddenly get involved in your life like that, I feel like it's a bit weird. But we hear that this guy has communications with non-human intelligence that he initiates through kind of like lifestyle practices, like meditation, yoga, diet, no caffeine, no alcohol, and this allows him to kind of have this, I guess, open link, telepathic link with some kind of intelligence, which again, like I said earlier, is very similar to what you've said, but it's kind of establishing this communication through a different framework. So I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on him and what you've learned about him so far.
My opinion on Tim Taylor, based on what I've learned so far, is, he seems to be another one of these people within. I don't know if would you say that he's part of the deep state? Would that be fair, or intelligence community or something like that?
Yeah, I think the deep state, it's such a vague term, there's so many layers to that. I don't know if I would consider him deep state, but like definitely in high levels in the intelligence community for sure.
Yeah, high levels in intelligence community, high clearance in government, I suppose. But there seems to be a few of these characters around who are like that, who are really into something spiritual. And I'm learning that more and more as I go down this rabbit hole myself. And John Dee actually was one of them. He's an example of that from 400 or 500 years ago, because he was actually Queen Elizabeth's advisor and was, played a role in her royal court of what we would today describe as a spy. So this has been going on for hundreds of years. And Aleister Crowley was in was an MI5 asset as well. So it's been going on for hundreds of years. And I think this guy is another example of that. And yeah, it's hard to know what his agenda is.
It is.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what I think about the hammer, whether that's a person or an intelligence from somewhere else.
Yeah,
But
well, yeah, it was recently that someone said, "Who is the hammer?" And it was Chris Bledsoe. I mean, I've only seen the screenshot, so I can't verify it myself. But Chris Bledsoe apparently said an angel, and then people were kind of speculating that angel is the Archangel Michael, which is what I kind of wanted to circle back to. So, and I mean, obviously that's just complete speculation on whoever's behalf that was, but I was curious perhaps why you think people would be drawing that conclusion to Michael and like what role he plays as an archangel.
I think people were probably drawing that conclusion because they're familiar with Michael. He's probably one of the most well-known angels. And so once Chris Bledsoe said it's an angel, they probably drew that link. The hammer sounds like some kind of sort of warrior type of angel, and Michael is the warrior that casts Satan down. So I guess that's why people would draw that connection. I don't know what I think about that, because the hammer is a reference to that movie, The Adjustment Bureau, which is describing a person who's in this kind of role directing people's fates. But it could be. I mean, Chris Bledsoe says it's an angel, but that's kind of, people take him as quite an authority on things in the UAP community, it seems. So yeah, I don't know what to think. I don't know if it's Michael.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, a lot of this stuff and a lot of the stuff I do on my channel, is we speculate and we theorize. So yeah, don't worry, no one's going to take like what you're saying as gospel. Let's sort of circle back to Aleister Crowley now. I wanted you sort of mentioned that you don't align yourself with his like total belief system, or at least anymore. So could you, because he's obviously like a towering figure in occultism and this whole world. So could you maybe explain sort of what his ideology was and why you've distanced yourself from it?
Yeah, so I think that Aleister Crowley is a complex figure, and there's a lot of good things that he did as well, and he brought a lot of knowledge to the public eye that comes from hundreds of years before of this esoteric knowledge being passed on and made it more accessible. But there were things about his lifestyle that were also quite quite immoral, and so I guess I recognize the complexity there. I don't think that, like some people say, he's a completely demonic figure and you shouldn't go near him, and you should almost be afraid of him, like Voldemort. And I wouldn't go that, I wouldn't go that far, but certainly there were things about his philosophy just to do with the unbridled kind of fulfillment of every desire or impulse that we have, no matter where that comes from, and the sort of selfishness behind it, not really thinking about other people's feelings or well-being when we decide to do something. It's just about what we will. And he tried to backtrack on that later in his life, writing commentaries on his previous books saying, but of course, it also needs to be in accordance with the will of the universe. But, if you look at the way that he lived his life, he didn't follow that. He was quite a selfish person. And so that was what I would say. And some of the spiritual things that he was promoting were on the darker side. And excuse me. And I've explored some of that as well in my own journey, and it's taken me down a pretty dark and uncomfortable sort of road, and so I've dismissed that from my spiritual life as well.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? So you feel like you've explored some of the darker facets of these practices. Can you go into that a bit?
Sure. So yeah, one of the things that Crowley promoted and taught was the Goetia, for example, which is a medieval grimoire, which is all about summoning demons to get them to do things for you. And so that's one of the things that I've studied in the past, and I've had encounters with demonic spirits, and yeah, it's not very pleasant. They might deceive you into thinking they can help you to begin with, but then things turn south pretty soon after that, particularly if you don't give them something that they want in return. And it's just a really dark, negative kind of spiritual space to step into. And before all the Matt Brown stuff happened, my most popular video was a video that I did kind of warning people against those practices based on my own experiences. And I still stand by that.
Wow. So you've encountered a demon through intentionally summoning it. What is that like? I mean, so because I obviously don't know, I've never done anything like this, so my question might be a bit silly, but when you're summoning a negative entity like that, is this something that manifests in like 3D reality? You can see it in your eyes? Is this something that comes into your mind, or are you seeing it in your mind's eye? Like, can you sort of run me through what that actual interaction is like? And when you're saying it wants something, what are we talking?
So it's kind of similar to the way that the communication with the angels happens. Like, you'll get images in your head, or you'll get thoughts in your head from somewhere else. I've never seen anything manifest or anything like that. When you're using the Solomonic kind of or Goetic techniques for summoning these things, you have a triangle in front of you, like a magic triangle, to bind the spirit so they can't, escape and then attack you. But that's not always 100% effective. But yeah, they're much more likely to lie. Angels will speak the truth. Demons will try and deceive you, or they'll say they can do something, but they'll leave out key information, which creates a completely different result. They're much more concerned about giving you things you want in the physical world. Angels encourage you towards higher things. And I guess if the demon decides it doesn't like you, or it wants to mess with you, things can happen in your life. Things can go wrong. Things can smash in the house. Lights can go out at weird times. So yeah, just not a good energy to have around. And if the demons do something for you, they usually want some kind of sacrifice, a token, or it's not like as sinister as it sounds. Like, the more ancient forms of that, but maybe an object or something like that.
Right. Is there a way to discern? Because you said it's not something that's manifesting physically. It's like, telepathic, I guess, communication is the easiest way to put it. Is there, like, how do you discern if you know if this is a negative or a positive entity that you're experiencing?
Well, this is going to sound a bit religious, and it might not resonate with everyone in the audience, but I found that calling upon the name of Christ can out a demon pretty quickly. If it's something that's demonic or dishonest, it'll kind of flee when you mention Christ's name, and or just God, just the name of God, like the four-lettered name Yod Hey Vav Hey, or Eal, the Greek name of God. These are things that compel spirits to be honest with you and to leave if they're not welcome there and they're not what you're trying to speak to.
Wow, that's really interesting. I don't know if you've seen, but that's something that is said, that's been said in the UFO community as well. I think specifically by Tom DeLonge, maybe like 8 or 9 years ago, when he kind of surfaced in that space. He said that kind of, yeah, saying Jesus Christ, and I think he did say that, but I think he sort of specified it doesn't really matter if it's Jesus Christ or if it's Allah. What it actually is it's projecting that like positive frequency of like, you know, love and enlightenment is what is like the killer blow to like a negative entity. It doesn't matter who it is. It's that positive frequency.
If that person was happy, sad, angry, jealous, all those things are certain types of frequencies. But for the basis of this conversation, let's say all the good things you feel or all the bad things you feel, okay? The UFO phenomenon is interested in the bad things, and it brings along a lot of bad things. But the good news is that when a human being feels good, when a human being feels love, when a human being feels happiness, that energy that's coming from you right now, whatever that frequency of happiness and love is it's a death nuke missile straight to the UFO. Over the years, we found that out, and we are trying to understand it, but it's really, really complex stuff.
Yeah, that does resonate with me, and you know, for me, it's the name of Christ because of my own belief journey and being raised a Catholic and sort of finding Gnostic Christianity later in life and resonating with that. But you know, I think it'd be too simplistic to say that there's one religion that has the key to, you know, having the truth and protecting you. I think whatever creates that positive frequency will do the trick.
Yeah, that's so true. And again, that's like what I was saying yesterday on the channel, is that like it doesn't matter what your framework is as long as you believe in it, because that belief is probably is what generates that like that strong positive frequency. Like the belief is the power, not the actual framework. The framework's just kind of like the vehicle almost to get there. Super interesting. Yeah. What about Jack Parsons? What do you think? Obviously, because he was heavily involved with Aleister Crowley and was, I guess you could say, yeah, like the father of American rocketry in a way. What's your opinion on what they were doing? I know they were most famously known for the Babylon working. What do you think? What kind of influence do you think they've had on, I guess, society today? And can you explain the Babylon working, what it is and what its purpose was?
All right. So Jack Parsons, yeah, as you said, the founder of American rocketry, was actually a member of the OTO as well. Friends with L. Ron Hubbard at one stage, although L. Ron Hubbard kind of scammed him in the end and left with everything that he cherished. And yeah, one thing that Jack Parsons used to do actually, which is quite interesting for our previous topics, is that he would give an invocation to Pan before his rocket launches. And I think that that's similar to some of the descriptions of Tim Taylor and the things he does as well with his kind of consciousness-induced launches at NASA. So I just wanted to make that connection. But yeah, Jack Parsons was a very interesting figure, very much a maverick in the scientific as well as the occult world. And just wanted to push things as far as he could in terms of experimenting with what's possible, and could be quite reckless at times in the way that he went about that. So the Babylon working was something that he did with help from L. Ron Hubbard, basically to summon the goddess Babylon from Thelemic cosmology, the kind of the Lady of Abominations, and he saw that as a symbol of liberation for humanity. But in the more Christian context, there's a bit of a darker role for Babylon there, if you read the Book of Revelation.
So is this the Scarlet Woman, what is referred to as the Scarlet Woman?
Yeah. I mean, the Scarlet Woman is usually seen as like the earthly representative of Babylon, which is this dark feminine, dark divine feminine kind of figure.
And it's interesting, right? Because if you look at, I've learned this from just following Diana Pasolka. She talks about how the people who are at the forefront of Russia's rocket program and the Germans, Hermann Oberth, they were all, again, with their own framework and their own lens, saying that they were communicating with a non-human intelligence, and that a non-human intelligence was essentially like responsible for the download or the information or the help in developing the technology to put the rockets up into space. Have you looked into that at all? That these, this isn't just a Jack Parsons thing?
Yeah, well, when I was talking to Pavel those weeks ago, yeah, this was something that he mentioned, which I'd never heard before about. There's people in NASA now who are, reading these ancient Greek or Greek kind of invocations before launches, and that's part of the process. So that was quite surprising to me then, and to hear about it happening in Russia as well, something similar. Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily think it would be necessary to make the science work, but I guess when you're launching a rocket, there's kind of there's quite a probability that something could go wrong, right? So if you wanted to increase the chances of success, then magic would be a good way of doing that, or some kind of spiritual technique to manifest would be a good way of doing that.
Yeah. It's so wild that stuff, it's one thing hearing about it, that in like, the 20s and 30s that these guys were doing this thing, but to then hear through people like Tim Taylor and whatnot, that these sort of ritualistic practices are still happening today when they're launching rockets, and that they obviously take this stuff very seriously, yet not a peep of it is in like mainstream culture, at least in the West. You really have to kind of dig to uncover this stuff. And then, like you said, you begin to realize that there's this whole other side of reality that the people who are in charge take very seriously, but they don't tell us about it. It's very strange.
That's right. And I used to think that it was just because we have this dominant paradigm in society that's very atheistic and materialistic and kind of scoffs at the idea of any of that existing. And I think that's still true, but there may be a more intentional withholding of information about some of this, and deliberate attempts to discredit some of this information, because knowing about it makes us realize that our potential as human beings goes beyond just the physical world that we inhabit, that there's levels of our being that can see and feel through space and time and touch other dimensions and all sorts of things. And there's a lot of things in our society that are set up to control us. And I think the lack of information about these themes is a part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, because knowledge is power, right? And by withholding that knowledge, you now have power. I think it's really as simple as that.
And the people with power do this stuff as well. I mean, look at Bohemian Grove, all the weird ritualistic things that they do in other contexts. Some of that is starting to come out now, although has been kind of denied again recently. But yeah, it's definitely a pathway to power, and I think that it can be used positively or negatively, and it's probably quite jealously guarded by some people.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And the one thing that's always tripped me out, and I've spoken about it so much on my channel, is how much Egyptian symbolism and iconography there is in like modern America. Like obviously the main one is the pyramid with the eye on their currency, on their dollar bill. You've got the giant obelisk out the front of the Capitol. You've got the NRO patches, the mission launch patches through NASA that have all of this weird like mid-century Latin and like, you know, like dragons and goddesses on them, and even Egyptian gods as well. And then you've got this whole story about the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you know about that. In like the early 20th century, allegedly this guy named G. Kincaid discovered a section in the Grand Canyon that is now completely prohibited to go to. You can't go there. You can't even fly over it. And it's alleged that he found not just hieroglyphics, but these areas in the canyon that look like they were made for ceremony. I think he even found like actual items that seemed like they were from an ancient culture there, which sounds fantastical. But what's interesting is that when you go on Google Maps now, that area of the canyon that is completely prohibited, it's named like the Temple of Set, the Tower of Horus, like it like Isis. It's got all of these Egyptian names, and that's literally what it's called. It's like kind of mind blowing. Like, and I mean, just the landscape itself is just like incredible. And I also found out that Thoth, who we were talking about earlier, is literally carved into the door of the Capitol building's library, which is just so fascinating because, like, you know, maybe you could strike off the pyramid on the dollar bill to, coincidence or something else, but there's just so much of this symbology that it's so clear that this stuff is taken so seriously by the people at the highest levels. So I think there's clearly something to it.
There is, and you could say if all you had was the dollar bill and you had Masonic symbols and there was kind of the same symbol there, you could say, oh well, it's a coincidence, or they just borrowed it without knowing what it meant. But actually, if you look into the history of the United States, like many of the founding fathers were Freemasons. And actually, Matthew Brown's most recent X post, after the X post with my stuff in it, has got George Washington with his temple regalia, with his apron and everything else, to signify that he was a brother Mason. And a lot of the architecture in America is influenced by Masonic symbolism. A lot of the values of the founding of America come from Masonry as well, to do with illumination and enlightenment. And people see Freemasonry as like a sinister thing. I don't necessarily think it's wholly negative. I mean, like any exclusive club with powerful people, it can be abused. But the teachings of Freemasonry themselves are not a negative thing. It's basically self-improvement. It's basically about applying spiritual teachings to hew the rough stone of your personality into the cubic stone of the perfected human being. So, and knowledge is the key to doing that as well. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but there is a Masonic influence on America in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me, the way you described what Freemasonry is about, it kind of sounds a little bit like Scientology, right? In a bit of another way, because, and again, Scientology is another group that is, what they teach and what they do is hush hush. It's very hard to kind of get a good idea of what goes on there. But from what we do know, it seems like it is about, kind of self-improvement, becoming a better version of yourself, and, kind of discovering how powerful an individual human being is, and the power of consciousness, and potentially projecting it. And I mean, let's not let's be clear, it also is shrouded in its own set of like creepy, weird shit as well. But what's really interesting is obviously L. Ron Hubbard, who was connected to Crowley, to Jack Parsons, went on to found that. And it seems like there are a lot of those sort of teachings that come from those, mystery schools, again, sort of, reshifted and reblended into perhaps his own perspective on things. But what's really interesting is that Hal Puthoff, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He kind of ran the CIA's remote viewing programs, and he's kind of like one of the key kind of sus CIA guys who's come to the surface in the UFO space through Tom DeLonge, who I mentioned earlier. And he was an operating Thetan level 7, which I don't know if you're familiar with Scientology, but that's extremely high up in Scientology, right? And from my limited understanding in Scientology, you pay to do courses, right? You got to pay to like level up in the church. They become more expensive as you go. And to become an operating Thetan, you first have to kind of cleanse all of the negative energy out of your body. You kind of have, it's kind of like getting back to being like a clean slate. And then once you've achieved that, and that's, takes years and a lot of money. Then once you've achieved that, you become an operating Thetan, and you then, from what I understand, you start the courses from there, then become about like telepathy, telekinesis, like really esoteric stuff. And this guy was apparently a number 7, which at the time was extremely high up. I mean, it still is, and probably $200,000-$300,000 to get there. When he's asked about it, when he's been asked about it in public, he completely just kind of washes his hands of it and just kind of says it was, he was interested in it in like the 70s and the 80s, but it was just something he was checking out. But when you look at what an operating Thetan 7 is and how you get there, it's something that you're clearly very invested in. So given that he was part of that, and now he's, involved in this whole psionic thing, which seems like another word for telepathy and projecting consciousness, I find it interesting that we're sort of learning about this stuff through what seems like a faux lens of Scientology. But it kind of seems like it does trace back to these occult practices, and it really is all part of the same set of teachings, but it's just a different coat of paint on it, whether it's Scientology, where it's like, Crowley's Hermeticism or whatever. It all seems like it's the same stuff. Do you feel like that as well? What do you think about Scientology?
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of overlap. If I said what I really thought about Scientology, I'd probably get sued. But I
say
think
it carefully.
I think that there's some original kind of teachings within Scientology to do with Xenu and putting the people in the volcano and all of that. But a lot of the kind of practices to clear yourself of unhelpful kind of attachments, however you describe that, and then being able to have certain powers and abilities or ways of perceiving is all stuff that has been going on for thousands of years. And I think it's just repackaged in a kind of sci-fi type of a way in that religion. And I think that it's taken different forms, but that part of it isn't original.
Do you know who Hal Puthoff is?
I've heard of him once. But before that, I didn't know who he was. But the Scientology connection is really interesting, and I think that it demonstrates this is another one of those people who are involved in this stuff at a government level, who are involved in some kind of alternative spirituality, and Scientology was just the way that it was kind of trending, I suppose, at that point in time. But yeah, it's all the same. It's all the same thing at a certain level of understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, because like what we're learning from these people that are coming out in the UFO space who are connected to, you know, the government and Scientology and whatever, they're calling it psionics. You know, I guess that's the new name for communicating through the ether, you know, non-locally with each other and beings, non-human intelligences, but also piloting the craft. That's like what we're hearing lately, is that these military psionic assets who have this ability, this ESP like ability, are being deployed to establish a connection and like lure down these craft, which is interesting because, you know, I don't even know if craft is the right word for some of these things. I mean, you know, when people see these like flying saucers that are, you know, clearly like some kind of metal, then I think maybe we can use the word craft. But like often we're seeing these egg-shaped things or these light beings, and then we're hearing that people are psionically communicating or sometimes even controlling them as well. I don't know if craft is the right word, and you know, is psionic, I think, is psionic just the word that is the latest word for us to kind of digest it on a mainstream level. But what's really happening is potentially something similar to when you are scrying or chanting and creating a connection with some other intelligence through like Enochian magic. Are they the same thing, perhaps?
I think they could be seen as the same thing in some contexts. It sounds like what you're describing as well is using telepathy or using mental projection to interface with technology, and then because that's what I've heard about some of these crafts, is that rather than flipping a switch on and off, you sort of just think a thought, and that is the thing that allows you to pilot it. And it kind of reminds me of Neuralink, what Musk is trying to do there, but it's you know, again, you have to have the technology in you to be able to do that. But there's that interface there between consciousness and the technology. But yeah, certainly with something more spiritual seeming, like a light beam, it seems like classic telepathy. And if you're talking about psionic in that sense, then yeah, it seems like the same thing as what we would have described as scrying in a magic ritual context.
It's like what we were saying earlier about, there feels like there's this shift happening in people where, you know, an elevation of global consciousness. It also seems like at the same time, you know, people the UFO phenomenon is coming more and more into the mainstream. There's this shift in consciousness. People are becoming more aware of like what consciousness even is and like what its role is in our society. It kind of feels like it's all connected. Do you think it feels like all these roads seem to be like converging on something, and that's converging on our future? Like that is the road that we're going down.
I do feel like that. Yeah, because in one of my recent videos trying to come to grips with angels and the reality of that, and then these orbs and whether they're the same, I kind of came to the conclusion that you can reconcile it all with levels of consciousness. Like, you know, even as a human being, you can have multiple different levels of consciousness, you know, a higher vibration or a low vibration. And all of this stuff, you know, the good stuff that's taking us into the awakening is it's all operating at that higher vibrational level. And so that's where I think it seems to be leading. It's to do with the jump to a new level of consciousness, and perhaps things that have done it before, which are trying to kind of encourage us to and help us in some way to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. It really does feel like it's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but there is something that seems to be kind of like breaking a spell that is sort of like cast over society where people do seem to be stuck in this like low vibration, but it's slowly lifting. You mentioned on in your interview with Pavel, you mentioned that you had a dream when you were a child about aliens. Is this the same dream that you mentioned at the start of this interview, or something entirely different?
This is something different. But I had lots of different experiences with dreams and just, I guess, things popping into my consciousness when I was quite young. And the earliest examples of that happening were to do with what I perceived as extraterrestrials, dreaming about aliens, basically. And it was multiple different dreams. But yeah, there was kind of similar themes that would run through each of the dreams. There would be a craft that I would enter, or beings would come out of it, and then sometimes they would give me a download, like they'd touch my head and I'd get like an information download. Sometimes they would just talk to me. Sometimes they pick me out of a crowd of people and do it and then put me back. And they look different each time, and probably existed in a form that couldn't exist physically. But it was all about what they were meant to represent, I think, which is something from the cosmos, which is try to interact with me in some way and put on a form that I'm going to understand within my culture to do that. Yeah, so that was pretty much the theme of the dreams. And sometimes they would tell me, the thing they tell everyone, which is that you have to deliver a message from us at some point, and let people know that we're here. So that's kind of the way that those dreams went.
Wow. So, and do you feel like that's led you down the road that you have gone down, or steered you in that direction subconsciously?
It's possible, because when I think about it, the things that these aliens in the dream were doing and the things that they were asking me to do are very similar to what the Enochian angels were doing with me and asking me to do. So if they're not the same entities behind it, then they're certainly working together. And yeah, all of the experiences that I've had are ultimately the thing that has put me on the path that I'm on now. It's, yeah, everything in my spiritual life that I'm following is because I've been directed to it. And it's found me, not because I was looking for it.
You said that the appearance that these beings took on couldn't really exist in the physical world. So it's not like you're seeing, Greys or Nordics or anything like that. Are you sort of like, well, could you explain it, how they appeared to you each time?
Yeah, so there were some that were kind of grayish looking, but maybe had a different skin color. But they had the big bug eyes and were quite small in stature.
Oh wow!
And there were some which I say they couldn't exist physically, because I'm thinking of a couple in particular which were sort of insect-like. Like they were insect-like, and they had kind of the top half looked humanoid, and then the bottom half looked like a beetle or something, and they had like an insect head. But if any bug like that existed, it would be crushed by its own exoskeleton because of how massive the exoskeleton would be. So that's why I say it couldn't exist physically.
Can you? How big was it?
Probably about 7 feet tall.
Wow. Have you seen? Do you know who Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch is?
No.
He came out in an interview earlier this year. This guy is apparently like a Delta Force sniper. He was in charge of launching nuclear weapons at one point.
A tall, 7-ish, 4-foot praying mantis looking being, and is just looking at me very intently and explaining to me, look, this body that you got, it is just a soul housing group. It's a brain housing group. It is just a machine that your soul occupies for this lifetime. And so, yeah, we're going to mess with it. We may swap a couple of parts out, but we can't steal you. We can't steal your soul. We can't steal your consciousness. But here's the thing. As proof, there was this image that he put him, and it was terrifying. His mandibles that were kind of behind like a casing or a shell opened up, and he starts grabbing chunks of my cheek, and he's ripping it, and there's blood spattering on the wall.
It started ripping his face off. So it started biting at his face and like pulling the flesh off. And John Blitch was saying he could feel it and he could like see the blood, but it wasn't actually happening to him in like 3D reality, but he could still kind of feel and see it, and it wasn't painful. And that this Mantid being was trying to demonstrate that like, we can't hurt you. Like, just relax. We're just doing what we need to do. We can't hurt you. So it's pretty interesting that you've had a similar encounter there. Would you describe it like a Mantid?
It was kind of like that. It's not like any insect that I can describe really, but it had insect-like features. It had the eyes and it had the kind of antennae, and the sort of the face was a bit different. The face was almost like a dinosaur-looking thing, but certainly the way that it sort of had the torso that looked kind of humanoid, and then the back it looked more insectoid, would be pretty mantid-like. And this particular dream, this being kind of, it came out of a ship. It took me out of a crowded place and then into another room and put its hand on my head, and I don't know what it was doing, but there's some kind of reconfiguration going on there.
Well, like you feel like it was managing not your memories, but like perhaps tinkering with like your mind or your consciousness or something. Yeah.
I don't know, almost like giving me like an update, or not an update even, just maintenance maybe. I don't know how to really put it into words. It was reconfiguring things for some reason. Yeah, it's hard to put into words.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And was it only one time you feel like you encountered this mantid-like creature in a dream?
There was another similar-looking being in my very first dream. It was sort of much more in the background there. There were a few different species that appeared in that first dream, and the mantid-like being was pushing it was like a big silver kind of slab that was floating above the ground, and it was sort of just pushing it along. I don't know what that was for. But then there's been other beings which, I don't know if you would call them mantid. It's kind of hard to describe what would they look like actually. They've got like smooth grey skin, almost like a dolphin skin, and are quite tall. Whether that's the same as the mantid phenomenon, I don't know.
And so they're tall with smooth grey skin. And what, do they have the same features as the mantid, or do they look different?
They've got some of the same features. Like these ones had the quite long dinosaur-like face, you know, like one of those herbivorous dinosaurs that has the long face. I can't remember the name of it now. And they also had the big eyes as well, and sort of like an elongation of the head going back like that. That was another dream. So probably less mantid-like, but similar features across all of them. Yeah.
And did you, like, in those dreams when there's multiple different types or looking beings, did you feel like, did you get a sense of like any kind of hierarchy structure between them? Like one was in charge, maybe one was a worker or something like that?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, they played different roles, but nothing that we could describe as hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when was the last time you experienced one of these?
When I was 14, it's the last one that I had.
Wow. And so from before 14 years old, this is something that happened like fairly regularly?
Yeah, it was something that happened fairly regularly from the ages of 11 through to 14. And then it stopped.
Wow. So wow. So 3 years. And just
Yeah.
wow, that's really interesting. Since you've been delving into the world of UFOs, since the Matthew Brown thing happened, has it shifted? Has I guess learning about UFOs and perhaps what you have gone down with Matthew Brown shifted your perception of your own practices or your perception on UFOs or what they might be?
It certainly made me realize that within the sort of bucket of UAP, there's lots of different things going on. Some of it might be top secret human technology. Some of it might be extraterrestrial. And then some of it might be more spiritual, like these beings of light. And it's helped me to understand that what I've encountered is more like the spiritual thing, which I'm actually more comfortable with because I'm quite a spiritual person, and that fits in well with the practices that I do with angelic entities and things like that. But I still have a lot of questions, and I find that there's lots of differences of opinion and a lot of deception that seems to be going on. And I'm still trying to make heads or tails of it. I still don't have all the answers that I want.
Yeah, me either. Have you reached out to Matthew Brown, or has he reached out to you? Have you ever spoken to him?
Look, there have been attempts or suggestions that we should meet up or make contact, but I can't really say too much about that. Can't say too much more about that.
Okay, that's fair. Is it something you would feel comfortable doing? Would you feel comfortable meeting up with him?
I would. Whether he would is another question. But I certainly do have a lot of questions for him.
Yeah, I bet you do. So do I. So I've got a few questions here that came in from the members of my channel. First question's from Eric, and it's a bit of a long one, but it's a good question. He says, in my own spiritual practice, I've had moments where it felt like I was discovering something entirely new, and others where it felt like I was just remembering something ancient, even alien to my normal sense of self. When it comes to systems like Enochian magic or communication with non-human intelligences, do you think awakening is about remembering something innately human, or are we tuning into something beyond human memory, maybe even mixing in something external?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it is innately human. I think that we have all of this potential within us to become something more, to become more angel-like ourselves in our level of consciousness, perhaps one day in the things we're able to do in the physical world. And some people think that the UAP entities are us from the future. Some people say that the Holy Guardian Angel, which is another one of these beings that you contact in Western occultism, that could be us from the future. So there is that school of thought as well. Sometimes we can touch something that is different to us, and perhaps something which is in us which doesn't feel entirely human as well. But if we've encountered new information that seems familiar, that can sometimes be because we've done it before. If you believe in reincarnation or rebirth, we can have multiple incarnations, and perhaps in a previous incarnation we have studied this material as well. We don't fully understand our ancestral memories either, and how those are transmitted, or to what extent. You know, there could be people in our bloodlines that have encountered certain knowledge before, and there's something at a genetic level that's latent that will allow us to remember that again. So there's all sorts of reasons why something spiritual can feel familiar to us, even though we've never encountered it before in this life.
Yeah, I mean, I think our bodies are like the most complex biocomputer, the most complex thing to exist, right? And it would make sense that there is some kind of like storage in our DNA, like some kind of data storage that is genetically built into us, each being, that it comes from our bloodlines and our ancestors, whether it's information, whether it's trauma. Like, I definitely think we are sort of born with some kind of knowledge set that might not be accessible straight away, but you can tap into. And I guess that kind of gets into something I'd like to ask you about, like the Akashic records, because I've definitely had, you know, whether you want to call it a download or whatever, I've definitely had moments where I have a thought that feels like a thought, but it's almost like a separate stream of consciousness, that thought comes with like a sense of knowing. You know, like obviously we have our dialogue in our mind when we're thinking, but then sometimes it's like a thought comes packaged with like a truth, like a knowingness that you just know. And I've wondered, like, is that like tapping into Akasha, the Akashic records? Do you have an opinion on the Akashic records, or have you had any experiences with it yourself?
I haven't done any practices to access the Akashic records specifically, but I'm familiar with the idea, and there's some of the stuff surrounding the Enochian magical system which is kind of similar. Like there's a particular practice in Enochian magic of working with the tables of Logger, which is all about accessing the knowledge that is in the secret book of Enoch, that Enoch wrote in heaven and is up in heaven somewhere. And if you can project your consciousness there, you can read it, and it contains all of the knowledge that's ever existed. So that's very similar to the idea of the Akashic records. I get what you say about the inherent truth of things when you get certain downloads and just a knowing. Yeah, there's a certain feeling. It's hard to describe, where you just know if something's true or not. Like, it just clicks. I can certainly relate to that. And yeah, it's different with a download as well, because it's just something that you couldn't think of yourself. Like you know what you think and what you would say in that situation if you were asked a particular question, for example, but the answer that you get from a download might not be what you would even think of. So yeah, it's definitely a thing that can happen in human consciousness. that's not well understood by many people.
Mm. And for anyone who maybe doesn't know what the Akashic Records is, I understand it as essentially like a consciousness field that is, here on Earth that contains all knowledge, like you said, the knowledge of everything that's been, that will be, and it's essentially like an information field that at the right frequency we can tap into and extract a knowledge from. It's almost kind of like a Wi-Fi, like an internet, like a organic internet field of knowledge that is accessible at the right frequencies, perhaps. On the download thing, the way I've experienced it often is like, it's like rather than having a thought and thinking it through step by step in your mind, I get like, it's like a zip file. I get like the fully compressed file in one, and then I have to spend time unzipping it and like thinking it out in my head, which is strange because it's like, how does an entire concept come start to finish in my mind that I don't actually fully understand yet? And then I sit here spending time thinking about it and like unraveling it in my mind. It's very strange. Have you had something similar like that? Is that how it happens for you?
Yes, in some cases, yes. Sometimes with things like scrying, our own mind can interfere, and it kind of, the message that we get has our sort of the signature of our own mind on it in the way that it's delivered. But sometimes, yeah, we just get this information, and it's a complete package, and we don't understand what it means. I've certainly had that with my Enochian scrying sessions. The one that comes to mind in particular is in one of my scrying sessions, I was shown one of the letters from the Enochian alphabet and told to study the letter, and that it contained mysteries of the temple, like the temple in Jerusalem from the Bible. And I just had no idea what that meant. And I'm still not 100% sure what exactly that means, even, several years later. But, the occult has things like gematria, like we attribute certain numbers to certain letters, and that has a numerological significance. So maybe there's a way to unpack it that way, but it's clear as mud. And yeah, it's like you said, it's like a zip file. That's a good description of it.
Mm. Do you still scry regularly? Is this something you still do?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't stopped doing it, but I haven't done it properly in a while. I still pray quite a bit if I feel I need a quick answer to something. But I haven't scried for a little while now.
I got another question from Jared, and he says, did you choose your name? I'm curious if that is your chosen Magus name. So I guess maybe explain what your name is, what it means, and how it came about.
That's another good question, because it relates to the UAP phenomenon as well. So Frater Eleftheria, it's composed of two parts. There's Frater and Eleftheria. Frater is a common prefix for anyone who's initiated into an occult order. It simply means brother in Latin, such as if you're in a fraternity, in college, for example. And then Eleftheria is the name that I've taken as a magician, and it's ancient Greek, and it means freedom, and or liberty is perhaps a better translation of it. And the reason why I came to that particular name is because I've changed my magical name throughout my time exploring the occult. I wanted something more positive. Because your magical name is supposed to be what you want your core self to represent, and the influence you want to have on other people's lives to an extent. So I came up with this name Eleftheria, which is a pre-existing name, but I was messing with it a bit to make it my own and make it significant to me, not knowing about what that might mean anywhere else in the external world. And I switched one of the letters in the Greek from I think it was an upsilon to a phi. Anyway, I had this unique spelling in Greek of Eleftheria, and later when I was just surfing the net for some reason, I came across an article on the Roswell wreckage and found out that that word with that exact spelling appears in a video about the wreckage. So, excuse me. So what I mean by that is like on the wreckage, the word Eleftheria appears, and I was kind of tossing up whether or not to use the name at all. But when you have a synchronicity like that, where you think a word is significant to you and you get confirmation from the universe, so to speak, that's a big indicator that you're supposed to use that name. So because of that Roswell connection, I actually ended up taking the name Eleftheria as my magical name.
So you're saying that the word Eleftheria was on the craft that crashed at Roswell?
According to certain sources, yes.
And obviously not written in English like it is here, but written in another language, or?
Yeah. So there's video footage. I don't know if it's a hoax or not, but there's video footage of men holding up bits of wreckage that they claim to have retrieved from Roswell. One of these bits of wreckage is an I-beam, kind of like a steel beam that we would use here for building. And there's some strange letters on the steel beam, which don't appear earthly at first glance, but upon closer inspection is actually a stylized form of Greek lettering. And if you spell out what it is, it's Eleftheria. But it's actually a misspelling of Eleftheria because it uses a letter phi where there's not supposed to be one. But that's identical to the deliberate misspelling of the word that I came up with. So that's what makes it so spooky.
Interesting. Yeah, because you do hear a lot, not just with Roswell, but there are a lot of cases of people seeing craft or even like technologies that don't seem of this world that have these hieroglyphic looking inscriptions on them. But people always say it's not quite ancient Greek, it's not quite Egyptian, but it's similar. It's similar. So do you think you were able to recognize some of these symbols?
I wouldn't say that I've recognized any other symbols that I've seen associated with wreckage or anything, and I haven't looked that deeply into it. Yeah, I mainly just know about the Roswell wreckage.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, you should look into that because it is a really common thing from the handful of cases that we've heard of that there are these symbols. So yeah, you should take a look into that. You might be able to decode some of it for us.
Yeah, maybe.
Question from Slothy. Are you familiar with the Ra contact teaching the law of one? Channeled books. Archangels are mentioned many, many times. Can you share how you feel about its teachings and explanations?
That is not something that I'm familiar with. I'll have to research that and form an opinion of it. But there's plenty of people who claim to have channeled higher beings or angels. I certainly wouldn't be the first person. and that, there's even examples like A Course in Miracles and Conversations with God, kind of more modern examples of people communicating with higher intelligence and receiving information. And all of the channels from the spiritualist movement kind of did that as well. I'll look into it though.
Yeah, you should. I've had a little bit of a look into it as well. I can give you a link. I'm pretty sure that book, The Law of One, is actually like all of the channeling communications that are contained in it are actually on a website, which I can give you the link for. It's super interesting. I've had a bit of a flick through it, and I believe like some of these contacts are from the 80s, even potentially earlier. And when you read them in 2025, the way things have panned out it's like astonishing and on how accurate it is. So yeah, I'll flick you a link for that after this as well. Another question from Eric, another good one. In an age of commodified spirituality and fast track ascension, it feels harder than ever to tell the difference between a real mystical experience and just projection of wishful thinking, especially with occult systems like Enochian that involve contact with otherworldly intelligences. How do you personally guard against delusion, fantasy, or ego traps? What helps you stay grounded in truth when the material is this strange?
Yeah, another good question. So I mentioned invoking the name of Christ before. That's something that I do quite a bit if I want to test a spirit and test the truth of what it has told me and what it presents itself as. And there's also techniques that you can use to discern true from false revelation, let's say, like something that's from outside of you versus something that's from your own ego. So usually if something is sort of a message that's pumping you up and saying, oh, you're this amazing person and you're greater than the rest and all of that, that's a pretty good indication that it's from the ego. Things that don't make sense, like it's sort of just like a information vomit and it doesn't really say anything coherent, is usually an indication of false revelation. It's different to having something that's perfectly packaged but you don't understand yet, which does indicate it comes from somewhere else. Other indications can be just the vibe that you get from the experience. If it feels kind of jarring or sinister, then maybe that there's something interfering from your own ego there. It's very peaceful and very loving when you connect with those higher beings. And I guess the kind of message that's being delivered as well can be an indication. If it's something that's going to improve your life and other people's lives with no strings attached, then that usually comes from a higher source. And if it's something that is kind of something you would disagree with, even because it's setting a standard higher than you hold yourself to, then that can be an indication that it's something authentic. And that's happened to me in the past. And I'm just trying to think, because I can't remember the name of the author. It was one of the people who was behind the Find Horn group, actually created a list to help distinguish between lower and higher psychism. And I've spoken about it in one of my videos on distinguishing true from false revelation. So that will probably give a more complete answer to this question.
What do you do to stay, like, do you have any practices outside of the Enochian magic system itself? Like, do you have things in your day-to-day life that you do to try and just stay grounded? Because obviously, this stuff can be, for someone who's perhaps not prepared for it, it could be quite overwhelming. It can be a lot, like, mentally. do you have things, you know, that you do to kind of stay in reality?
Yeah. Well, when I first started out on the magical path, or earlier in that path, I suppose, I did a lot of banishing rituals. So in the systems that I was exploring, there's two rituals in particular called the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and the lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram, which is supposed to clear a space of any energies that might be hanging around, but it's also about clearing your own inner space as well. I used to meditate a lot when I was younger as well, and when I was still in the AA, a practice that I did, which is from the Vedic rather than the Western tradition, quite regularly, was Raja Yoga. It's a form of meditation. So yeah, meditation is really good for that. It's probably the best thing, I would say. I'm not as strict as I was back then, though. Like, I don't do a practice every day anymore. But if I feel I need to clear my inner state, there's practices like that I can do.
What would you say to someone who's interested in exploring these kind of things? I mean, would you recommend it? Do you have advice or warnings? And how would someone who wanted to go down that path begin?
I think there's a lot of great information for free online, including my YouTube channel. That's a good place to start. I think I've tried to be quite comprehensive in covering a lot of the topics that are relevant to this path. But there's websites that you can go to. I think what was it? Hermetic Library, I think, is a great free website for finding spiritual texts. Some of them are quite old, but yeah, going back to just the classics, like anything that you hear, just go back to the primary source and fact check it. Like if it's something about Kabbalah, you've got the Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah, those kind of core texts, the Hermetica for Hermeticism. So just always fact check. You can study this stuff as an individual, as a solitary practitioner. It does help to find a teacher as well. You can get where you need to get a lot faster. But there's a lot of people that are a bit culty out there as well. So it's a bit of a minefield to navigate, to find someone to teach you this stuff. And in terms of entities, just stay away from anything demonic. You'll hear theistic. I mean, everyone's different and everyone has to make their own choice at the end of the day. And these entities are on their own path of redemption or further damnation, or moving wherever in the wheel of samsara. But in my own experience, it's just better to stay away from that. And anything you think they can do for you, you can do for yourself.
Yeah, great advice. So yes, Lifting the Lamp is your YouTube channel. If anyone wants to go check it out, I'll make sure I leave it linked below. Is there anything else you want to plug or talk about, or even like what's next on your channel, sort of where you're sort of heading with it in terms of content?
So I'll talk about upcoming content. That's probably the biggest thing that I'm preparing for at the moment. There's other quite significant milestones in my spiritual journey and information that I have discovered on my spiritual journey that I'll be sharing there. There's still things from the Western esoteric tradition that I need to cover off to make that information database more comprehensive for people looking for this or that issue. But as time goes on, it's going to evolve more towards new things that I'm bringing forward as a result of my own practices. And one of those things is a book that I'll be publishing next year that I'm aiming to publish next year, which details all of those angelic communications that I described earlier, and really paving the way for that to happen. So that will be a big theme in the future on my channel.
Wow, that's exciting. So this is going to be a book detailing like what you've learned and what happened during your communications.
It is the communications. It's yes, it's what I wrote down during these sessions. Yeah, like a kind of like automatic writing. It can be seen in that kind of a way. It's a record of what these angels told me to pass on.
Nice, man. That's really exciting. Well, yeah, we'll definitely look out for that. We'll keep an eye. Is there a social media or anything that you use that you want to put out there as well?
I am on Instagram. I don't check it very often, or as often as I should. The main social media platform that I'm on at the moment is YouTube. My channel is Lifting the Lamp, of course, and I may start a Patreon at some point in the future, but that hasn't got up and running yet. But if I do announce it, I'll announce it from my YouTube channel. Awesome, man. Well, thank you for your time. We've done nearly 2 hours. I really appreciate you coming on here. I found the conversation absolutely fascinating, and it's nice to talk to another Aussie as well. So I really appreciate you coming on here and giving me your time. Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate you having me on the show as well. Not a problem. It's been my pleasure, mate. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, mate.
Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on?
No matter how far you go into the dark, when you flip, you go exactly the same place to the light in our galaxy. Everything. Because everything is in balance. Everything is a polarity.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is.